Say Shabbat Shalom, brothers and sisters. We're going to continue with our Shabbat meditation. We're looking at nuggets from Romans chapter 14. And as always, we begin our study with the understanding that we are to study to show ourselves approved unto the Most High, workmen who need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth, and that all scripture is God-breathed and is therefore profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the person of the Most High may be complete, thoroughly furnished to every good work. We have been in Romans chapter 14 for several weeks now, and so this will probably be the last time that we'll be covering the principles in Romans chapter 14. And so what we would like to do, we're going to go back and forth between the slideshow and the scriptures. So I'll start first of all with how we're going to be looking at this. Again, we're looking at Romans chapter 14 nuggets. There's a reason why that graphic is on the screen, and we're going to be talking more about that. But we're looking at the law of meat versus the law of liberty. And we're also going to be looking at the precept that the law of love in this chapter is the focal point and therefore the most important. So as we begin, we read the scriptures last time, so we're not going to read them again, but I want you to notice the headings. So it's talking about the law of liberty in this chapter, and it's also talking about the law of love in this chapter. So we're not going to read all of the scriptures, but I do want to focus on the overall themes, and as the scriptures have pointed out. So at verse 1 of chapter 14, it says, "Except him or her whose faith is weak, without passing judgment on his opinions. For one person has faith to eat all things, while another who is weak only eats vegetables. The one who eats everything must not belittle the one who does not, and the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for Yahuwah has accepted him." All right, now, so the Apostle Paul, writing these thoughts and these precepts in the form of this letter to the Roman church. Once again, the Roman church was comprised of the bloodline children of Yasharel who had been born again and received the blessing of Yeshua as the Messiah, the anointed one of the nation of Israel, as well as those in Rome who were Gentiles and had also embraced that knowledge of truth. So the Roman congregation had both groups within it. For the most part, the younger ones would have been the Gentiles. Okay, so the weaker ones would have been the Gentiles in one sense, the sense that they wanted to do things the right way, and sometimes their focus was on the thing rather than on the spirit behind the thing. So I wanted to start the lesson out with the understanding that they were having a dispute about food, okay? Which is why the Apostle Paul is writing to that issue. But the crux of the issue from what the Apostle Paul is teaching has to do with the spirit and the purpose behind these precepts around food. So we've talked about that before. And as we said last time, and this is where we're going to pick up again, the issue really wasn't what you're eating in terms of vegetables versus meat, because as we also said that meat that is described when it comes to temple worship is not actually the flesh. The meat offering, if you will, sometimes was grain, okay, or fruits and vegetables. So what they were dealing with was a society in which the people had idols. They would sacrifice to their idols with food products. And it was, but the food obviously was not going to be eaten by an inanimate object, and the people would eat the food. And so when they were selling the food in the marketplace, you wouldn't know if the food was going to someone's house for them to consume or them buying that same food to sacrifice to an idol. And so the church is trying to figure all of this stuff out. So what the Apostle Paul has to do is tell the people, look, here's the real deal, so to speak. Okay. So having said that, now we're going to go back to the slideshow. As it says here, the law of meat versus the law of liberty. And what the Apostle Paul begins saying, since we already read the verses, we're just going to sort of recap and pull out those nuggets. It's not the food that you're eating, it's who is being worshiped. So the food and its culture and the culture out of which the eating of the food comes is not actually the same as the culture around the food being a part of idol worship. So the focus was actually on idol worship, as we already said. Now we're going to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 13, just so that you can see that I didn't come up with this on my own. So 1 Corinthians chapter 8, and actually I'm going to read from the very first verse. This is a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the brothers and sisters in Corinth, but it's dealing with the same thing. If you would take note, the heading here is take care with your liberty. See, the people receiving these messages were being instructed on how one is to live once one has become a child of the kingdom, a born again Christian, and what that actually looks like on a daily basis. So it starts out by saying, now as touching things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but charity edifies. So there's two perspectives that the Apostle Paul is talking to and speaking about in 1 Corinthians. The reason why we're looking at this is that this is the exact same issue that the Romans were dealing with, because it has to do with growth and development in the spirit. Having the knowledge is good, but the source of the knowledge, the purpose of the knowledge, has to be seen from the lenses of charity or love. Okay, because that it was the love of the Most High that allowed his people to become his people. Okay, so verse 2 says, and if any man think that he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. But if any man love the Most High, the same is known of him. So all of these rules and regulations have to do with how we are to love the Most High. Okay, it's not here's some rules and here's some regulations, and we will be weighed by what we do with the rules and the regulations. You have to look behind the rules and the regulations to the purpose. And the purpose is, if the Father says do something, I'm going to do it because I love the Father, which, if you remember, is the first and great commandment. Love the Most High with everything you've got. And then the second commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. He's still dealing with these two commandments as he's speaking in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Verse 4 says, as concerning, therefore, the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifice unto idols, which is what we were talking about before. We'll continuing that verse 4. We know that an idol is nothing in the world. There is none other Elohim but one. For though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be gods many and lords many. In other words, what he's saying here is, I know that there's a lot of gods around here. I know that you have worshiped a lot of other gods, whether you're worshiping the gods in heaven, such as the planets or the stars, or whether they be gods on earth, where you worship trees or you worship crocodiles or just pieces of rock that are carved into human figures. Okay. And so what Paul is saying is, I get it. I know that there are all kinds of other gods. Verse 6, but to us, and that's the key thing, he's talking specifically to the bloodline children of Yasharel and those who have come into the same covenant as Yasharel. Okay. But to us, there's but one God, the Father, or the source, of whom are all things, and we in him, and one Master, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him. So he's giving the framework for the Most High's people to understand their position in the world, and in a world that has many gods. Okay. But he's not saying that there are no such thing as these other gods. What he's saying is, we know that there are other gods, but we know also that for us, there's one. Okay. Now, verse 8, howbeit there is not in every man that knowledge. Everybody does not know that. For some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered unto an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. So do you see, this is the same conversation that the Romans were having. It was the weak brothers and sisters that were still thinking the idol had more power than it actually did, and therefore eating food that was sacrificed to an idol in their mind was anathema and should not be done. But the Most High's instruction through Paul was, I understand that, but that's because you're weak and you haven't seen the whole picture yet. Okay. You don't realize there's no such thing as another God. Okay. So you can't eat meat sacrificed to that God, because that God doesn't eat. Okay. So they hadn't gotten to that point yet. And so because they hadn't gotten to that point yet, they were trying to condemn those who had gotten to that point. But those who had gotten to that point were not taking that position seriously, and they were actually causing friction and contention among the body. So what the Apostle Paul is doing is saying, this isn't something that's supposed to be causing contention among you. Okay. So then he goes on, verse 8, but meat commends us not to God, for neither if we eat are we the better, neither if we eat not are we the worse. That's how we know it's not talking about the food per se. Okay. Verse 9, but take heed lest by any means this liberty of yours, see, that's where liberty comes in. Liberty is the freedom to do something because you have been set free from the bondage of something else. Okay. So the bondage of idol worship, the Most High's people had already been set free of, which means that that whole paradigm meant something completely different to them. Okay. So verse 9 again, but take heed lest by any means this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to them that are weak. Who is the them that are weak? Those who are new to the faith, those who are trying to walk this thing out, but they're doing it with a fleshly mind. And they think that this is all about the rule of not eating meat or just eating vegetables, which the scriptures absolutely had not said. Okay. Now, verse 10, for if any man see you, which have knowledge, sit at meat in the idol's temple, shall not the conscience of him which is weak be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols? And through your knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died? But when you sin so against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against the Messiah. So in essence, what he's telling the strong is, look, don't be flaunting your liberty, because that would cause your brother who hasn't gotten there yet to be weak, because they actually think, okay, so really what you're saying is it's okay for if I can eat what's offered to idols, there's nothing wrong with me being in the idol's temple either. So they would slip right back into idol worship. And that's why from heaven's perspective, both of those positions have to be brought together, which means that you have to look at the purpose of the unction from heaven as to what to do with these things. Okay. Starting at verse 11, and through your knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died? But when you sin so against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against the Messiah. So in essence, what he's saying is if you make your brother sin by doing something that you really don't have to do in front of him, and therefore you won't be encouraging him to do it, then you've done that to the Messiah. All right. So you've sinned, in other words. All right. So because whatsoever is not of faith is sin. Wherefore, if meat makes my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world stands, lest I make my brother to offend. So if that's going to be an offense to my brother, I change my eating habits because I'm the stronger one. All right. So I don't expect the weaker one to follow me. I respect where the weaker one is. That's the mark of a true believer. All right. So now we'll go again back. Okay. So the whole purpose is that we should live so as we uplift our brethren rather than offending our brethren. So those of us who are strong may have to change our diet, not vice versa. Okay. And then verse 12 says, because we're going to give an account for this. Okay. We're going to give an account for whether or not we caused our brother to stumble, not because of our dietary practices. The dietary practices are subservient to the purpose for the dietary practices. That's the point. Okay. So the law of meat versus the law of liberty. Yes, I'm free to do these things. No, I'm not free to do these things if they offend my weaker brethren, because they are the most important, not my will. See, this is a completely different way that the Most High's people are to operate from how the world operates. The world says, no, you have to conform to what our mores and attitudes are. In the spirit realm, in the world of the spirit, in the mind of the spirit, it's those who are stronger serve those who are weaker. They don't make those who are weaker serve them. Okay. And that has to do with something that goes all the way down to what we eat. All right. So we have to learn to parse out the spiritual intent of the Most High's laws. See, so what? Okay, so one other thought with that law of meat versus law of liberty. In the process of teaching those who are weak, those who are strong are also teaching. Now you know what the real purpose of this law is, right? Or if you don't, let me explain it to you. All right. So the more the weaker brother is given the explanation, the more the weaker brother or sister can grow into the knowledge that, oh, it doesn't really matter what I eat, but I'm not supposed to entertain the culture of idol worship. So that's the point. The point is idol worship. It's not what I eat. So eventually that brother or that sister may come to the same position as the stronger brother. And then the meat part is not a problem. Okay. Because they have been instructed in the right way to understand the purpose. Okay. So now the next point, the law of love is the most important. Okay. So we already read 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 13. So verse 13 tells us again, we are the us in this case. Verse 13 tells the stronger brethren and sisters not to put stumbling blocks and obstacles in the way of the weaker brothers and sisters. But so everything that you do, everything that we do because we love the Most High and we love the Most High's people. And therefore, as the scriptures are instructing us, we submit ourselves one to another. And the people who teach submission aren't the weak ones. The people who teach submission are the strong ones. See, that's the opposite of the Babylonian mind that the church has been operating under. We exalt those who are supposed to be the stronger by submitting to them, when in actuality, the stronger submit themselves to the weaker. Not in terms of sinning, but so that the weaker will not fall into sin. Okay, so the way that we stop putting stumbling blocks and obstacles in our brother's way is by saying, okay, well, since that's how you see this, then we'll do this thing together. I won't eat it either. All right. But as you gain more understanding, we'll revisit this again. So the stronger has submitted themselves to the weaker in faith. And I should have mentioned that this all has to do with strength and weakness in faith. So what is the motivating factor? It's love for the Most High, the first commandment, and love for the Most High's people, the second great commandment. The weak are encouraged by the strong because the strong pursue that which leads to peace and leads to edification of their brethren, or in this case, those who are weaker in the faith. Okay, so then we get to verses 14 through 19, and we're specifically told nothing is unclean in and of itself. It's how we think about it. Now, we probably should do a much more in-depth lesson on this, because brothers and sisters, this is all about how the children of Yasharel were given to operate within the temple worship structure. All of this is about that. Okay. Don't forget, the leaders in Yasharel, in Israel, were not picked by Israel. They were picked by the Most High. And the leaders and the priest were one and the same. Those who led the nation were the priests. All right. It was the nation that wanted a king. The Most High set the nation up so that the leadership would come from inside the tabernacle. And I'm not talking about the human beings inside the tabernacle. I'm talking about he who sits in the Holy of Holies and visits with his people through the Holy of Holies. That's the leader of Yasharel. He is the leader. Okay. And so when we as a people decided, no, we don't want him as our leader. We want a king like everybody else. And that's when Samuel was told, well, give him a king then. All right. But that's not how the Most High had set things up. Now, why are we saying this? It's because the whole notion of that which is unclean and that which is clean was related to sacrifice. Everything was related to the innocent having to be killed for the guilty, the system of sacrifice. And so there were only certain animals that could be sacrificed. Therefore, there were only certain animals that should be eaten. And that which is clean and that which is unclean did not come from human beings. It came from the Most High. But he, in giving those instructions, already understood, look, nothing is unclean in and of itself. All right. It's what has been determined to be clean and unclean by me. All right. And therefore, how you think about it has to be the way that I have laid it out, not by what you think. Again, I know of denominations, I know of people who use Genesis, the first few chapters, to say we are only supposed to eat fruit and vegetables. I also know that in that same book, Genesis, after before Moses brought all the animals into the ark of safety, when right before the flood happened, he was told to bring into the ark not animals by 2 by 2 only. Clean animals were to be brought in 7 by 7. Okay, so before they even before they even experienced the flood, the Most High had already taught them about animals that are clean and animals that are unclean. This is how we know what the intent was. Well, why did they have 7 clean animals but only a pair of unclean animals? It's because the unclean animals were not going to be sacrificed. The clean animals were going to be sacrificed. Okay, so it was always about sacrifice, which is the way to worship the Most High. It's the way that the covenant that the Most High has with his people is cut. It's cut through sacrifice. It's cut through the shedding of innocent blood. When they came off the ark, he told them, okay, you can eat these animals, but you can't eat these animals. The animals that he told them they shouldn't eat, and this is why I'm saying we probably need to do a whole study on this, had to do with the fact that I've put those animals on the planet to clean up after y'all. They're to eat your crap and turn it back into something useful. So don't eat those animals, okay? Because what that means is you're eating your own feces, if you will, to be blunt about it, okay? So it had to do with the cleansing process that the Most High put into the earth to continually renew the earth. And so the animals that are on the earth for that, we're not supposed to eat. And that's where the shrimp comes in. That's where I'm sorry, I have to say it. That's where the catfish come in. That's where the reptiles come in. There are a host. Well, that's where the birds of prey that are the so-called scavengers come in. All of those animals are considered unclean. Okay, so that purpose was twofold. One of them was, here's how you maintain the renewed planet that I have made for you. I have told you how you can prosper, how you can sustain yourself, but I've also told you how the rest of the planet is sustained, because you always are going to mess it up. So I've put animals here that will clean up your mess. What's that got to do with the law of love? He loves us and the planet enough to have configured it in those ways. So when we do what he's given us to do, then that's how we live. And therefore, we return back to him the blessing of his looking out for us. All right. But it doesn't have any, well, it has less to do with the fact that, you know, we're not supposed to eat horses either. Okay. So it has less, or dogs. Okay. Let me stop. But the point is, it's not the meat of the animal itself. It's the purpose that the Most High gave for the animal. And that's why we say it's how we think about that. So we don't eat what he says not to eat, because that's what he has given us in terms of how to prosper on the planet. All right. It's not that he didn't create an animal to be unclean. He identified animals as unclean by their function. I should have started by saying that. Some animals are not to be sacrificed. One last thing. We're talking about animals, but if you remember, the same applies for people. There was, of those 12 tribes of Yasharel that came into the land, or came out of the land of Egypt and into the wilderness, there was only one tribe that could be the priestly clan. And it was only a part of that priestly clan that could actually be in the temple and serve in the temple. The rest of them were outside of the temple and could not go into the temple. What makes something clean or unclean is the instructions from heaven. That's it. Okay. So we get no points for doing what we say to what we're instructed to do. That's what he expects us to do. All right. And there's no point in us trying to lord it over someone else who doesn't want to do that. Okay. Why? Because the kingdom is not about meat and drink. The kingdom is about righteousness and how to be in shalom with the Most High and with your brothers and sisters. So that's what we are to pursue. We are to pursue peace, and we are to pursue mutual edification through following the words that will bring about peace. And that takes us all the way back to the Shema. Hear, O Yasharel, Yahuwah, your source is one, and you shall love the Most High with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And as we do those things, it's with that understanding, it's with love of the Most High that we do what the Most High tells us to do. And it's also with when the Most High instructs to us. Now, you know that I'm the only God. You do know that, right? Okay. So once we come to that understanding, we know I can't sacrifice to something that doesn't exist. All right. So that's a growth process. But if my brother or sister has not gotten to that point yet, then I love my neighbor as myself by surrendering my liberty in the Most High, so that they will not be offended. That's how the Most High's people are to work. So we'll stop there. We just covered Romans chapter 14, the nuggets in it. Father, bless you and keep you. Father, make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Father, lift up his countenance upon you and give you his shalom.